One of the most fascinating battles of the Civil War happened here at Utoy Creek in Atlanta, and this was towards the time where Atlanta began to waver, and specifically it was kind of towards the southwest of Atlanta. Now, by August 4th, the Confederates had established a hospital here out of the local church, and Sherman wanted to head down there, flank them, and not attack the hospital, but cut the railroad lines that fed the city. Well, it seems to be that this battle was totally forgotten because Union troops lost well over 800 men, and Confederates who had fortified their hospital only lost 18. Behind me are unknown Confederate soldiers who may have died in this battle, but it's more likely that they died at the hospital from wounds received at places like Kennesaw or North Georgia. And directly over to my left from these graves, you have the ruins of trenches. In fact, just to my north, about a mile in the local park, you actually have federal trenches as well. So this battle involved many thousands of people, and it perhaps killed at least 800 Union troops, but we don't know how many died. And you saw how he behaved at Kennesaw when he ordered his men to charge directly into a line of cannons as a diversionary tactic. He just didn't write about this in his memoirs, and it was such a crushing defeat that it never got written into the history books, and now modern historians are going back on the Union numbers, which report only maybe a couple dozen to 100 dead, and they're saying it seems to be that hundreds perished here, and we still don't know where their final resting place is. It may be hard to see in video, but this here is what is left of an old Confederate trench at Utoy Creek. Right close to here would have been the old Confederate hospital that the Union basically said that they weren't trying to attack, but Confederates had built their defenses around the hospital. And this trench stretches on quite a distance in the woods there, and I would hope that my followers on this YouTube channel don't come out here and try to search for anything. Usually these trenches around Atlanta, as well as the ones up north in the park, the federal trenches, are kind of well-hidden secrets because, you know, it takes a bad person to do this, but they would come by and they would dig the trenches up, even though they're in a cemetery. Here, I believe, are the battle dead from Utoy Creek, although I have no way of really confirming this. These are original Confederate unknown graves, and they said about 18 of them died in battle, while over here, the Confederate cemetery is probably a remnant of what was left of the hospital, and they were treating folks from the siege of Atlanta there, and that is the Utoy Church, and this battle would have waged all around me. And here at Utoy Creek, I do want to point this out. I wanted to say that the Union Army, at least farther west from here, issued a evacuation of all Jews. They basically expelled the Jews, and there was actually a small battle fought, a skirmish, because the Jews in that area were merchants, and they felt that the Jews were supplying the Confederacy. So the Jewish history in the Civil War is kind of unknown, but a fascinating short chapter. Behind me is the grave of General Pleasant J. Phillips, who is a relatively unknown figure in the Confederacy. So his story begins, really, at the Battle of Utoy Creek. As Sherman was advancing, he tried to lead his troops up from the southwest to penetrate the Confederate defenses of Atlanta. And Sherman, much like he never really wrote about his direct frontal assault at Kennesaw Mountain, never really wrote about the Battle of Utoy Creek because he lost it. Firstly, there was a Confederate hospital, and it's very possible that a lot of men died there, and it wasn't popular for Union troops to attack hospitals. Secondly, even though he said later that only a couple of dozen men died, modern estimates place it at upwards of 800 or 900. And like his frontal charge, Sherman's, on the north end of Kennesaw Mountain into a series of Confederate guns, he did this basically as a diversionary tactic. He threw his troops into the meat grinder, and he didn't think that sounded honorable, so he never made note of it. So after eventually losing to the Confederates at Utoy Creek, eventually the Union Army was able to take the city of Atlanta and began marching towards Savannah. Pleasant Phillips made it back to Confederate lines and moved down towards Griswoldville, which at the time was a Confederate weapons production facility, and he led 5 separate charges of a Confederate Home Guard militia. It was just Georgia riflemen, young boys and old men too old to go to the front lines earlier in the war, charging the Union positions. They initiated 5 charges that morning, and not one was successful. Now again, he won Utoy Creek, he lost Griswoldville, but it's seen as a fight with honor, something which towards the end of the war both sides showed a lack of.